spirit.
I call Brett Hudson. Tēnā koe.
E te tia mana, tēnā koe. Mr. Chair, we have been treated tonight to some speeches from the opposition. Treated, mistreated, choose your language. They seem to be confusing their own opinions with the facts, whereas the facts are quite simple. The economy has been growing at around 2.6%. Over the last 4 years, 192,000 jobs were created. A further 150,000 are forecast over the next 4 years. Over the same time period, unemployment is forecast to reduce to under 5%. The economy is doing very well, sir. Interest rates are low. Inflation over the last quarter was just 0.3%. New Zealand businesses, New Zealand families are being treated to a lower cost of living and lower cost of debt, helping to provide incentives to businesses to grow and Kiwis to feel more secure in the paying of their home mortgages. But what instead have we heard? In the face of those facts, what have we heard? Well, firstly, we had from Mr. Robertson wild assertion after wild assertion. As my colleague David Bennett pointed out, none of them underpinned by numbers. His was a very special speech, Mr. Chair. It's known as a Burger King speech, just one whopper after another. And he got confused in the process on taxation and what he referred to as bribery. And as my learned colleague Christopher Bishop pointed out, he doesn't seem to understand what taxation is. I'd like to take just a moment, Mr. Chair, to help to put him straight. Some years ago, a New York newspaper, I think it was the New York Times, ran a competition where if you could change a single consonant or vowel in a word and create a new one, there would be a prize. And some chap came up with the word intaxication. Intaxication is defined as the mild sense of euphoria you feel upon receiving a tax refund before realising it was your money to begin with. Mr. Robertson thinks giving your money back is somehow a bribe. But we went from wild assertion and complete misunderstanding of the taxation system to the Green Party and James Shaw, who obviously doesn't know about Daniel Patrick Moynihan, because that member most certainly was thinking that he could have not only his own opinion, but his own set of facts. Mr. Shaw tried to tell us that dairy makes up 40% of our exports, but while acknowledging that it makes up 5% of the overall economy. Well, that's a very interesting assertion on its own, because tourism, Mr. Chair, is now worth 7% of our economy. So based on his maths, that would mean that tourism is in the order of 60% of our exports on its own. That would leave no room for the $2.85 billion of international student education, which is itself an export and equates to around 1.3% of the economy, which the maths tells us is roughly 10% of exports. So we've got to 110% of exports already. Nor would it leave room, Mr. Chair, for the wine industry, which contributes 1.37 billion worth of exports, up 8.2% over the past year. Nor, sir, would it provide room for the exports in the ICT sector, which contributed about $930 million, and which overall as a sector, both domestically and export, is around 1.7% of our economy. But Mr. Shaw would have us believe that dairy is a far greater proportion of exports than it truly is. But what those numbers tell us, what those facts tell us, Mr. Chair, is that we do have a diverse economy. Because while I mentioned wine and I mentioned ICT, I mentioned international students, I didn't mention meat. I didn't mention forestry. I didn't mention fisheries or oil and gas or minerals or kiwi fruit. Any of those other products that Kiwi businesses export around the world, which I guess must take us up to, I don't know, 130% of exports using James's numbers, who can be sure. But what it does show us, Mr. Chair, is that we have a very strong and vibrant economy, a very strong, diverse export set of industries across New Zealand. And while dairy might not be performing at its traditional highs or recent highs, the other parts of our export economy are performing very solidly indeed, and they are contributing to those continued good, strong growth numbers that match up with any country in the OECD, sir, that are continuing to provide jobs for Kiwis, continuing to provide confidence to New Zealand businesses and New Zealand families in their future. The country is headed in the right direction, Mr Chair.